Pop, 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 pop.
De technieker zit daar, dus als er iets is, dan doe je even tekenen en dan komt hij wel.
Ja.
Clemmy.
Good morning, everyone. We will resume our session, so thank you for returning to your seats. After the very inspiring keynote that we just heard from Mr. Morrissey, we have now also an exciting panel lined up for you. I'm very happy that I'll be able to introduce you to 4 experts that come from different environments and that will share their views on the very big question that we have for today. You've all seen it. It's how to be smart about digital education and development. It's a big question that has many aspects to it. It's less than 2 years ago that the world agreed on a very ambitious agenda for development. As you all know, the Agenda 2030. And we know that one of the goals that has already been shown is the Sustainable Development Goal number 4, focuses on education. And at the UN General Assembly session, where that agenda was adopted basically by the world, it was not only the governments, also civil society was there. Many international agencies, private sector was involved. At that time, people already made it very clear digital will play an important role in realizing this ambitious agenda. And for those who are not yet convinced, because we will not spend much time today about convincing you that digital is important, just 2 small examples. Those that have followed the news have heard about the cyber attacks less than a week ago. So last Saturday there was an emergency meeting of the Ministers' Council in Belgium on that specific issue. Yeah? It's everybody's concern. The new threats that come about through the digital revolution. We can't ignore them. That's on the negative side. On the positive side, in Mr. Morrissey's presentation, he already mentioned his grandkid, who perhaps knows more about certain softwares than he does. It's exactly what a colleague told me yesterday who was very skeptical about the need to invest in digital for development. He says, I don't feel comfortable about digital because, and he was talking about his son who's 9 years old. He said, I can't help my son anymore with digital aspects, so how can I professionally say anything about digital? And I think that example shows that digital actually changes power relations. It changes the relationship between parents and their children. It changes the relationship between teachers and their students. It changes the relationship at the global level. It's no longer the West that has all the answers for development. A lot of new development in this area is actually vibrating in African countries, in Asia, all across the world. So far for convincing you that we can't ignore this whole potential and this, all the risks that digital brings and that we need to prepare ourselves for. Specifically for the panel discussion, we have 2 areas of focus. We're here to talk about education, and there's 2 relationships with digital. The first one is, of course, digital for education. How can it help us to achieve the education goals. It means how can we reach all the children that we want to reach, all the learners that we want to reach, how can we improve the quality, and how can we make sure that teachers and the school leaders are more effective. But it's also education for a digital world. Yeah? As I said, we can't ignore that the world is changing. We need to prepare the young people to function in this digitalized world. So the two have to go together. It's not either digital for education or education for digital. It's really the two combined, and that's another challenge. How do we effectively combine these two objectives? So that's about everything I'm going to say. The four speakers still have much more interesting thoughts, but I want to point out at the beginning that this is your conference. Yeah? So while you're listening, already take note of the questions you will want to ask to the speakers. Yeah? Use the time that we share with them as effectively as possible. Think about these questions, because we give them only 15 minutes. They have to be very brief to give you a taste of their depth of knowledge. But then we want to target a discussion on where you're most interested in. Yeah? So help us tailor the conference to your needs. So, without further ado, I will introduce the first of our panelists. That's Ms. Nivi Sharma. She's the president of BRIC Education, and she'll explain you what BRIC Education does. She's also a co-founder of eLimu, which is the first company to digitize the Kenyan primary school curriculum for revision and literacy. She's a thought leader in education technology for emerging markets and has dedicated her career to developing simple and holistic edtech solutions. So please, Ms. Sharma, we're very eager to listen to your presentation.
Again, my name is Nivi, and I'm from Nairobi, Kenya, and I work with an organization called BRIC. So before we go into, talking about how to be smart about incorporating technology into education, maybe I'll start with what we've learned over, I think I've been putting tablets or technology into schools for the past 10 years of my life. And what I've gathered in terms of all the moving parts and how do we define this new phenomenon that we're calling ed tech nowadays, and what that consists of. So the last company that I started was eLimu, and like I said, that was a company that digitized the Kenyan curriculum. And so that was interesting because we went to schools and we said, here's all the revision content and past papers, and for every topic in the curriculum, there's animations or videos or songs, things to make the content really engaging and interesting. And schools would say, well, this is great, but we don't have computers, we don't have laptops, we don't have tablets here, we don't even have electricity. So, trying to fill in those gaps for many years and, learning the challenges and honestly failing quite a few times helped us really gain the experience that we have today. So when we we were there in that orange little band over there with content, but we realized there's much more to education technology than digital content. At the very base of the pyramid, we have basic infrastructure. So that includes backhaul connectivity, electricity, either solar or mains, but also a safe, dry room within a school. And it's something you may take for granted here in Belgium, but it's certainly not something you would assume that every school has in all over Kenya. And then there's the hardware. So is it going to be smartphones or is it going to be tablets? Is there a need for keyboards? How big should the screen be? There's a whole debate on what kind of devices are the best devices to put in the hands of schools, in the hands of students at different ages. And then there's software. Interestingly, Kenya is an example of a country where Microsoft spent a lot of money, providing free training to teachers. So now all the teachers know how to use PowerPoint and Word and Excel, and so they think they know how to effectively integrate ICT into education. But what kind of software is the most intuitive, easy to use, and doesn't require as much training as possible? And then, of course, there's the content. So we can always take Khan Academy content and Wikipedia content, but we're really seeing the value of having locally created content, content that's culturally relevant, content that's appropriate and language relevant as well for students. And then, as Jerome said in his keynote, let's not forget about the teacher. And that's one of the first mistakes we made. We took these tablets and we said, they're Android tablets, they're so intuitive, you'll figure it out. And we went back, and 3 weeks later, all the tablets were locked in a cupboard, and the teacher said, nope, we don't want to use these. The students know how to use them, but that's making us look stupid. So teacher training was really at the heart of one of our biggest lessons in terms of how can we implement and integrate ICT into a classroom more effectively. That better? Thank you. Did I stand over here? And so training was, more important than we ever thought it would be. And then finally, support. Once you put devices or a technology into a school or a classroom, don't forget that things will break, things will stop working. What kind of support are we providing the school, the teachers, and the students with? And finally, there's no point in doing any of this until we're measuring impact. Measuring what are the outcomes, what are we actually doing here? If we're spending $100,000 on a school, and we would be better off spending that $100,000 just hiring more teachers for the school, then maybe that's what we should do. Let's not, put technology into schools for the sake of technology itself. So that brings me back to my title, which is Metis and Metrics. Metis is a Greek word for deep local knowledge. And we found that deep local knowledge, being on the ground with schools, with teachers, with students, is really what's going to drive metrics. So when people say, what impact are you having? What are the outcomes? Are students learning better? Are teachers teaching better? Let's go back and think about what true metis means when you're implementing a program especially an African context, as is my experience. So we kept coming back to this question as a hardware company in Kenya of why do we keep using technology that's designed for London and Los Angeles when we don't live there? And we keep coming back to this problem because we see that often solutions designed for and by other economies in the East and West are being forced down the throat of African infrastructure realities, and that's not working. And they fail over and over again because they're not designed for us, they're not designed by us, and we can't ignore that problem anymore. So what we do at Brick is we build hardware. So the heart of our product, beyond even education, is this, which is the Super Brick. So this is a wireless router. It's got onboard storage on it. It's self-powered. It takes very low solar consumption on it. And you can just put the internet on the brick, even when you're completely offline. But the point is to be online. We believe in open and free internet, access to internet. And so you can plug in 3G GSM SIM cards in here. You can plug in satellite broadband. You can plug in satellite or broadband, and there's failovers. So the idea is that you should be able to be connected anywhere you are in Africa. And so that's the heart of the product that we do. And the way that we got here in terms of the solutions we're building is by what we do. And that is what we say is called listening deeply and carefully to the sound of the river. So there's an Irish proverb that says if you want to catch fish, you should listen to the sound of the river. Not the sound of your boat, not the sound of your friends, not the sound of the guide that's taking you, but the sound of the river. So that's who you're helping. That's who you're creating interventions for. So we spend more time than anyone else in classrooms. It's shocking to say that we're the only education hardware company in the world that has designed their solution while sitting in an African classroom. And the sad reality when you come to Kenya is the people that we speak to, the schools that we speak to, the assumption always is, no, someone in America or someone in China will know better, and they'll design a solution and bring it to us. So we spend a lot of time in classrooms designing our education solutions. We spend a lot of time with youth in community centers where we hope to deploy these, watching how people use smartphones. So 62%, this number is so debatable, but they say 62% of Kenyans own a smartphone, but very few of them are able to afford to go online. Once in a while, we're seeing people are walking instead of taking public transport, so they can buy a small little data bundle so they can check Facebook or message on WhatsApp. So we spend a lot of time saying, well, if we put one of these super bricks in a marketplace or a bus stop or a barbershop, what will young people do on the internet? How can we introduce the internet and digital literacy to people who have devices of their own but are not doing that? We spend a lot of time in very remote rural areas. So coming to Nairobi in Kenya is not a good indication of Africa. They say that Nairobi or South Africa might be Africa light. But really going out in places that are at the very edges of networks and grids. And so by listening in the education context, by listening to the sound of the river means listening to that lady there, the teacher. Who is she? What is her job? And again, like Jerome said, she doesn't go into a classroom and say, today I'm going to use technology. No, her job is to say, today I have these 3 objectives. These are the learning objectives that my students should achieve. So it's, am I going to teach, are you going to leave this lesson here today knowing how to calculate surface area of a square? Not, am I going to have a nice picture to put on an NGO's website of you holding a tablet? That's not interesting to her, or that's not what motivates her. So she's tired, she's underpaid, she's overworked often. We know she doesn't know the difference between an Ethernet cable and a VGA cable and an HDMI cable, and we think she shouldn't. So we said, instead of trying to drill information down into her and overwork her even more, we should be building solutions that are easy and that she's able to use, relatively easy. The way that she uses Facebook, the way that she uses M-Pesa, Kenya's mobile money platform, in a way that comes naturally to her rather than something she has to struggle with. So our education solution is the Kio Kit, and that tries to bring everything together in one neat little box: the hardware, the software, the connectivity, and the content. So the hardware itself starts with a rugged 7-inch tablet. So again, we wrote down a list of all the things that we thought a tablet should have. It should be 70 centimeter drop resistant. It should have a higher IP52 dust and water resistance. The age range we were aiming for, we said a 7-inch tablet would be good for little hands. We know that as children grow older, the path that, again, Jerome spoke about, they're moving from consuming content, interacting with content, to creating content. So when they grow older, maybe they want a larger screen and a keyboard. And then we thought, one of the largest points of failure, and this is shocking, one is dust, especially chalkboard dust and humidity in remote areas of Africa. But the number of tablets that I used to bring in at Ilimu and just blow out the dust and they would be fried, that was a big point of failure. The other point of failure was the charging port. So it would either break, just children plugging in and yanking out the chargers every day, but also just in terms of how much time it would take. So we said we wanted wireless charging as well. So we went with this list to our device manufacturer OEM in China, and they said, you're not describing an inexpensive solution for Africa. And it was the Kenyan engineers that came up with how we can do this in an affordable way. So we certainly made some compromises. There's no Bluetooth, there's no camera on these tablets, but we said, how can we strip it down and still make it an affordable product that still blends well with our core ethos of a good user experience. So this is what the entire kit looks like. There's 40 tablets, and I obviously didn't carry it with me. It's quite heavy. There's 40 tablets in a big box. They're all wirelessly charged. There's only one cord that plugs into the wall. And it's designed to be user-friendly. So once you charge it, everything inside there runs for 8 hours. Inside the Kio Kit is the brick. So this is an offline version of the brick inside the Kio Kit with only educational content. So when a student switches the tablet on, they see Learn, Play, and Grow Alone, and they can go into curriculum content, they can play games, or they can look at extracurricular content. And so that's the heart of the Kio Kit. And again, the main design ethos and principle we adhered to is to say that how do we reduce the time and the friction between when the bell rings and when learning begins. So we know that we did a good job of this. We've won lots and lots of awards, lots of recognition for doing it. We've deployed the Kio kits in over 14 countries, all over the world, from Mexico to the Solomon Islands, because it's so beautifully built and so intuitively built for people to use. And we're now, really scaling up operations, so we don't take individual orders anymore, but only orders of 100 or more. But we're realizing, and that's, realizing that there's 800 moving parts in that piece of hardware. And for a small company who have never built hardware before to tackle this problem and tackle it with the best engineers in Africa was a huge feat for us that we're very proud of, that we've built something that's stable, that works well, that teachers enjoy using and students enjoy using. But beyond that, we're continuing to roll out the super bricks all over Kenya to cover. Our aim is to connect Africa to the internet, to cover the entire country with our own infrastructure, with free Wi-Fi. So anyone can connect, anyone can get online, anyone can access offline content, online courses, and so on. And that's really our mission, and to continue doing it in a way that stays true to our principles of listening to the sound of the river and real metis. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nivi. That was very interesting. You've presented us with two technological solutions that are very much adapted to the local context, that are designed for scale, that are integrated. I think it's a good example of how the digital principles that we know can be put into practice. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions. Note them down. You'll have time for that. But we'll now move on to the second presentation. So I'm happy to introduce Mr. Richard Hansen. He's, as a former teacher, now a senior education programs advisor for Cambridge Education. More than 25 years of project experience with diverse organizations across Africa and beyond, and currently supporting DFID's Deepen program to empower Lagos parents and other stakeholders by improving the flow of information about affordable private schools through collaboration with the media and civil society organizations. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Koen. So, good morning, greetings from a small island. This presentation addresses the central theme of the conference, but perhaps takes a broader view in offering some learning on the conditions for successful application of digital technologies, and I stress the application. This is very much based on Cambridge Education's management of DFID's innovation funds, first of all in Rwanda and then more recently in Pakistan, as well as the introduction of digital technologies in a lot of other major education programs in Africa and Asia. I thought perhaps before we get into the conditions for success that we perhaps might just consider what we're actually trying to do here. The potential, if you like, for EdTech to address SDG 4. So I've looked at this through an innovation lens. And just to make the point really that digitalisation can, in effect, sustain the current system and build on what we already know, as well as being more disruptive. And we can look at digitalisation in both the formal learning environment of the school as well as the informal learning environment outside of the school walls. And hopefully there's a permeable sort of boundary between those two. So what we can look at is how EdTech can improve what we're already doing. Sorry. By coming in with better resources, other facilities, improved teachers, better school leadership, how it might supplement what schools are doing by working more with families and communities outside of school, how EdTech can help us reinvent schools challenging the curriculum, challenging the way school buildings themselves are used. Okay, looking again at how a school day works, how the timetable is worked. It offers us these sort of opportunities. And for those more radical innovators, it offers us the opportunity to transform learning, perhaps even doing away with schools, but by making learning available in radically new ways. So that's what we're trying to do. But the key to all of this is actually finding better solutions that achieve impact. And by that, I mean measurable impact. And I think that's quite often forgotten. And what we really need to do at the start of this is to first understand the problem. And as I advised my daughter leaving for her exams yesterday, when we understand the problem, then we answer the question, okay? We're very good, I think, sometimes. We're hot on the how, but sometimes we're weak on what we're actually trying to achieve. So by way of just a few examples here. On the top left, this is English in Action in Bangladesh. Resources for teachers and students on mobile phones and SD cards, actually improving on the performance of the teacher in the classroom, helping kids learn. On the top right, supplementing what goes on in school with a community mapping project, community mapping of natural resources using GPS technology, getting kids out into the community, interacting with community members. On the bottom right, audio-visual materials of the genocide in Rwanda, including witness testimonies that challenge the curriculum by introducing the concepts of critical thinking, changing the way that classrooms are managed, how kids operate and interact with each other and manage their own education. Really groundbreaking stuff. And then on the bottom right, how 20 million Bangladeshis can access English language learning resources through a multimedia approach to self-determined learning, able to choose when and where they learn and conduct their own assessments, monitor their own progress. Again, so really big opportunities presented to us by digitalisation. But in terms of the factors for successful digitalisation, I've broken this down at sort of 3 levels. First of all, take this at the system level, and this can be public or private for that matter. What we're trying to do, I think, or what we need to do, is develop something of an enabling environment for digitalisation. We're looking really at a culture of innovation, and that is very much easier said than done. To help us do that, what we would look for is developing broad leadership. Leadership from the top is certainly very, very important. We found that in Rwanda. We were well supported by the minister with the backing of the president. But actually what we really want is broad leadership at all levels. This has to come down. It has to allow non-submissive behaviours. It has to allow for risk-taking. It has to overcome the fear of failure. And it has to inspire initiative. That's very difficult in an autocratic, hierarchical sort of regime. We need policy and curriculum that is responsive to new developments and allows for their introduction. And that includes encouraging staff through their terms and conditions of employment and their continuing professional development to embrace digitalisation, make it part of the job. Organisations, whether in the public or the private sector, and this includes the ministry as well, have to be learning organisations. There needs to be innovation informed by robust research. That's research into not just the solution, but into the problem. What are we actually trying to address? When we're involved in these new initiatives with digital technologies, there has to be rigorous M&E. we find in a lot of the projects that we do that there's great ideas, but people really struggle to actually monitor and evaluate what they're doing. And at the end of the day, as has already been mentioned this morning, that comes down to learning outcomes. It's got to achieve something in terms of children's learning. And when we've got all of this research and all of these findings, we have to effectively communicate them. Okay? It's really important that these sort of barriers are broken down and we can try and get away from the idea of sort of operating in silos. And I think if we're talking about, a digital revolution, we're looking at bringing in new players, new partnerships, working with government, working with the private sector, working with industry. It's a dynamic innovation landscape, new skills, new experiences, new resources, new sources of funding, and of course, many, many new ideas. At the community level, parents especially, as they should be involved in anything that goes on in school, have to be involved in digitalisation. Other community members too need to be part of the picture. This means them buying into digitalisation, sometimes literally, with their hand in their pocket. It means that they're supporting what's going on in schools, what's going on in the community, in the home. It means that they become activists, advocating for digitalisation. And there's no reason why they're not also involved in this M&E process, monitoring its use and success in schools. And at the sharp end, at the school level, our experience has been that ICT is more readily adopted when it, I think this word's been used several times already, integrated, when it clearly fits with and supports the delivery of the curriculum within the school timetable. It can't be seen as a standalone or extracurricular activity. Some of these projects in Rwanda, fantastic ideas, but they weren't part of the school day. And it's very difficult for them to gain traction unless they fit with the school day and with the curriculum. And again, teachers, I'm happy to say, have been mentioned on many occasions already, but ICT is complemented and guided by teachers who retain control of the class and the learning experience, who manage the education process in school and actually are central to any model of school improvement, I would say. Others may disagree. And these teachers must be adequately supported. And this is something, again, that is very often overlooked. We see proposals come in, 2 years of project work introducing IT, 2 days of teacher training to put it into school. That's not going to happen. So, from their initial training, pre-service training, but particularly in-service training and ongoing mentoring. And that mentoring we found, whether it be by peers, by head teachers who have a big part to lead what goes on in schools in terms of the teaching and learning, or by designated mentors, perhaps from the district education offices. It's really important that this is seen as a collective effort, collective learning, cooperative working. It's very much a team effort. And all of this links in to teacher incentives. If there's one word that keeps coming up in all the sort of field work that we're involved with, it's this idea of incentives. Is it relevant? Is it worth my while? As a teacher, is this going to make my job easier, quicker, cheaper? Is it going to be better to use a digital solution? Will it produce the results to inspire me to greater things? Or will it help me personally in my own professional development? If it doesn't do any of these things, your technology is going to stay in the cupboard. You might see it when your project officer comes to visit, but otherwise it won't gain the traction that's expected. So invest in the technology, but invest in the people. So, that, if you like, is a complete picture of perhaps conditions for success. So, if you sort out all of that simultaneously, then digitalisation will be a doddle, very doable. Okay, no problem. And one thing, just to complicate it further, perhaps, don't forget that from the very beginning, we need to be thinking of how to take digitalisation to scale. Not hundreds of children in project schools, but millions of children across national education systems. So that has to be planned in from the beginning, both in terms of your own organisations, how it grows, where the money is coming from is absolutely critical. What economies of scale can you achieve? How are you going to sell this, possibly in the marketplace? And in case all of that sounds too daunting, let's just remind ourselves what's at stake here and the difference that EdTech could make at all levels of the sector. These are just a few project examples, but really positive uses of education or technology in education that are making a real difference. From school attendance monitoring in South Sudan, these hubs, internet-facilitated hubs in communities in Nigeria, and in the classrooms in Pakistan, where we're seeing really, really good quality materials on tablets making a difference to the learning and teaching experience. But there are skeptics. Not everybody is convinced. But I would suggest that the 3 points to take away: get the learning right from the outset, understand the problem, understand what you're doing, understand your results, and get that broadcast. Deal with the incentives, motivate people to get involved, make it worth their while, and engage with all the new players that you need to engage with. If you're an EdTech company, you need to talk to teachers, as Neva has explained. You need to talk to finance people, you need to talk to government, you need to talk to industry, whoever. And lastly, a reminder that when it all seems too challenging, in 10 years' time, it will be bleeding obvious. So, thank you. That's me, and that's Cambridge Education, and that's our website.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for providing us with the key to success in the form of a very clear analytical framework that links the school with the community and with the system. And thanks for pointing out at each level what we should take into account. I think that's very, very helpful. I hope you're all ready to continue. We have 2 more presentations lined up. And therefore very happy to introduce our 3rd speaker, Ms. Mona Laroussi, who's a teacher researcher at the Université de Carthage in Tunis and the Université de Lille in France. She's seconded to the AUF, the Agence Universitaire de la Francophonie, and she currently holds the position of Executive Director of the IFIC, that's the Institut de la Francophonie pour l'Ingénierie de la Connaissance et la Formation à Distance. So the aim of this institute is to promote the deployment of digital technology in French language universities and at the level of teaching, research and governance. So we'll be switching to French for those who need the headsets. Please.
C'est bon, on a des fans pour la francophonie, c'est super. I'm sorry for non-francophone speaking, but I have to speak in French because I'm working in French university schools. Voilà, donc je ne reviens pas sur ce qui est l'IFIC et tout, je vais aller directement Je vais juste présenter, pour ceux qui ne connaissent pas l'Agence universitaire de la francophonie, très rapidement, c'est quoi l'Agence universitaire de la francophonie? Donc, nous sommes 817 universités établissements, répartis sur 106 pays, et nous avons 39 campus numériques francophones. Nous sommes 400 employés répartis dans le monde. Et puis, à l'AEF, nous avons 5 instituts, dont l'IFIC, que je dirige. Voilà un peu la carte de l'agence. Qu'est-ce qu'on fait à l'IFIC? Je vais très rapidement le faire rapidement. On fait un peu de la pub. Je profite de votre présence. Donc, on fait tout ce qui est recherche en numérique éducatif. On fait tout ce qui est conseil expertise. Et puis, ce qui vous intéresse ici, c'est la formation, sensibilisation et innovation. Je reviens un peu au cadre de la journée d'aujourd'hui et de la table ronde. On travaille un peu sur la qualité, l'accès à tous à l'information, l'apprentissage tout au long de la vie et l'égalité des chances à l'accès à l'information. Donc, c'est un peu dans ce cadre-là que nous essayons d'agir pour justement former les enseignants, leur donner la possibilité d'intégrer les ICT, les 10 dans leur enseignement et surtout permettre à toute personne, à tout enseignant d'avoir accès à ce genre d'outils, pas uniquement les enseignants qui sont dans les villes ou dans les grandes villes. Donc nous avons mis en place un programme qui est transfert. Transfert, c'est pas une faute d'orthographe, c'est vraiment un transfert santé. Donc transfert qui est l'acronyme de transférer le savoir francophone en éducation et recherche par les TIC et les TICE. C'est un programme qui date maintenant de 21 ans. Nous avons organisé depuis, j'ai pas les chiffres avant 96, malheureusement les stats n'existaient pas. J'ai les chiffres à partir de 2004. Nous avons organisé depuis 2004 jusqu'à 2016, fin 2016, 2000 sessions de formation, formé 25 000 enseignants universitaires et engagé 200 formateurs. Nous avons mis en place une sorte de passeport avec AUF, qui ressemble un peu à passeport français, avec à chaque fois ce qu'on appelle un portfolio de compétences. Donc à chaque fois qu'un enseignant suit une formation, il a un visa sur son passeport, et à chaque fois qu'il enseigne, il a également un visa dans son passeport. Donc c'est une sorte de portfolio de compétences où on sait à tout moment où est-ce qu'il a formé, qu'est-ce qu'il a formé et à qui a-t-il formé. Je vais aller rapidement sur ça. Disons que depuis 96 à 2016, et surtout qu'on travaille de 96 à 2016, on travaille dans les technologies de l'information et de la communication. C'est un peu obsolète. Donc, le référentiel qui a été mis en place en 2016 était un peu obsolète. On parlait comment utiliser la souris, la compétence d'utiliser la souris. On parlait aussi comment permettre une saisie rapide sur le clavier. C'est des compétences qui ne sont pas très adéquates en 2016. Et surtout, c'était un document PDF trop grand, trop long. On n'arrivait même pas à se situer dans ce document. J'ai commencé par les points négatifs pour terminer sur une bonne note. Ce programme a le mérite d'exister. Il a permis une démocratisation et d'accès à TIS à tous les enseignants. Ça a permis d'avoir des enseignants qui ne viennent pas du Nord pour enseigner dans les pays du Sud, ou comme elle a dit tout à l'heure notre collègue Nivi, ce ne sont pas des outils conçus dans le Nord pour être appliqués à Nairobi, Yaoundé ou autres, ce sont des formateurs de ces pays-là qui ont pris la main. Nous avons, grâce à ce programme, développé de nouveaux usages. Donc, l'enseignant intègre le TICE dans ses cours. Ce ne sont plus que des petits PowerPoint qu'il déroule ou un vidéoprojecteur. Il a vraiment utilisé le collaboratif. Il a vraiment utilisé les outils de travail partagés. Il a aussi synchronisé, communiqué. Et puis, nous avons développé 2 ressources pour les pays du pays. Donc ce ne sont pas des ressources qui viennent de la France, la Belgique, le Québec pour les pays, mais ce sont vraiment des ressources du pays pour être appliquées dans le pays. Donc rapidement, le programme est obsolète. On a repris le programme. J'ai que 15 minutes, donc je vais aller rapidement. Mais je vous donne ma présentation. Donc on a mis en place un référentiel de compétences. On a mis en place un outil interactif pour consulter ce référentiel de compétences. Nous avons développé de nouveaux parcours de formation qui sont plus adéquats ou plus idoines pour 2016 que des programmes développés en 96 pour les Belges. Et puis, nous avons mis des formations, des référents transferts. Et puis, rapidement, nous avons mis un outil de scénarisation et je reviens rapidement là-dessus. Le problème des formations qui ont été développées, c'était des formations rigides. C'est-à-dire qu'un enseignant ait des compétences préalables ou n'ait pas. C'est ça ma formation, vous la suivez. Même si vous connaissez tout, vous êtes obligé de la suivre. Donc, nous sommes passés sur un autre mode de formation, une formation plus flexible, qui peut être adaptable, c'est-à-dire qu'un enseignant arrive, il a besoin d'un certain nombre de compétences et il développe avec un outil de scénarisation la formation qui répond à ses besoins. Nous avons aussi remarqué que 5 jours pour une formation, pour mobiliser un enseignant 5 jours, c'était difficile. Notre public cible, ce sont des enseignants à l'université. Donc, il doit s'absenter, il doit reprendre son cours, etc. Donc, nous avons permis également qu'ils aient ce qu'on appelle une modalité différente. Donc, un enseignant peut choisir de faire 3 jours à distance, 3 jours en présentiel. Il peut également choisir de ne faire qu'une seule journée de présence et de travailler le tout à distance. Donc, nous avons mis en place un système flexible, adaptable, qui fait du sur-mesure. Donc voilà, après, voilà un peu l'outil de référentiel de compétences. Et ça, c'est l'outil qui nous a permis de concevoir la scénarisation, qui s'appelle Scénarii Bazar, comme un scénarii. Et grâce à ce Scénarii Bazar, nous avons actuellement une centaine de nouveaux scénarios de cours qui peuvent aller de la formation du français en langue étrangère, le FLE, jusqu'à des parcours difficiles. Pour répondre aussi à la formation, nous avons fait une enquête auprès de 800 enseignants pour leur demander quels sont vos besoins en termes de formation. Nous avons telle formation, quels sont vos besoins? Ces enseignants-là, la plupart, ils ont demandé des MOOC, comment concevoir un MOOC, comment je peux faire un MOOC. Mais disons qu'il y a eu beaucoup de personnes qui demandaient la classe inversée, qui demandait comment je peux faire avec mes cours avec des jeux sérieux. Donc nous avons répondu à ces besoins-là et nous avons créé 14 parcours qui répondent justement à des besoins qui ont été identifiés dans le questionnaire. Vous imaginez un peu qu'on a eu aussi de la cybersécurité parce que c'était à la mode, parce qu'il y a eu des attaques. On a eu aussi des demandes très simples. Comment je peux utiliser Internet pour avoir des bonnes ressources, un peu ce qu'on appelle la gestion documentaire ou la recherche documentaire. Donc on a eu différents types de besoins et on a essayé à travers 14 nouveaux parcours de répondre un peu à ces besoins. Donc voilà un peu ce qu'on a mis par rapport à ça. Et le nouveau transfert, à partir, donc, si on fait toute la somme, on est à 38 972 à partir de ce moment-là, 976 formateurs, 22 511 formés et nous avons 46 types d'ateliers. Bon, je vais aller rapidement sur des chiffres, mais ils sont toujours là. Ce qui me plaît toujours, ce sont ce genre de photos. On voit toutes les personnes ramassées les uns sur les autres en train de former. Donc vous voyez un peu Bamako, Mauritanie, Dakar, Bambay, enfin toutes les Ho Chi Minh Ville. Ça c'est un nouveau campus numérique francophone, nouvelle génération à Ho Chi Minh Ville, Abidjan, puis Saint-Louis. Donc les différentes photos où tous ces ateliers-là se déroulent. Je clôt un peu avec le transfert. Je reviendrai après si vous voulez. Nous avons mis en place aussi ce qu'on appelle un métaportail de ressources éducatives libres. Donc ça, c'était une demande qui vient de l'ensemble des pays francophones. Donc suite à une réunion qui s'est déroulée à Paris le 5 juin 2015, et la demande a été formalisée pour qu'on ait un portail propre à des ressources francophones. Donc nous avons mis en place ce portail, c'est un portail où vous pouvez accéder à l'adresse id9.org, c'est très facile. Donc sur ce portail, nous avons 40 000 ressources éducatives libres provenant de 20 pays. Entre le Mac et le Windows, la compatibilité n'est pas à 100%. Donc, quelques chiffres. Donc, ça, c'est un métaportail que nous avons mis en place pour voir est-ce que les gens accèdent à ce métaportail ou non, est-ce qu'ils utilisent les ressources ou non. Je fais beaucoup de recherches en numérique éducatif. Je sais que le taux de réutilisation, que ce soit d'une ressource éducative ou d'un parcours, est très, très, très minimal. Donc, on a essayé de comprendre pourquoi les gens ne partagent pas, est-ce qu'ils visitent ou non. Donc, nous avons mis en place une petite enquête. Cette enquête-là est en cours en ligne, mais je vous partage avec vous aussi. Donc, la plupart des personnes connaissent le métaportail par soit un colloque ou une formation comme celui-là, ils le reprennent, soit par les réseaux sociaux. Donc, vous comprenez un peu l'impact des réseaux sociaux maintenant dans nos travaux. Nous avons un problème énorme de partage. Donc, toutes les ressources ne proviennent pas des pays dont ils ont vraiment besoin des ressources, mais proviennent des UNT en France, proviennent du Québec. Donc, nous nous sommes posé la question, pourquoi vous ne partagez pas? Comment vous voulez partager? Donc, nous étions un peu sceptiques sur ça. Les personnes ne partagent pas parce qu'ils ne savent pas qu'ils peuvent partager, ils ne savent pas comment partager, ils ne savent pas qu'est-ce que ça va leur apporter de partager une ressource. Et puis, il y a tout un modèle économique qui est basé sur le non-partage, où on peut vendre nos polycopiés, où on peut aussi avoir des livres en papier et de vendre ce livre-là au début de l'année. Donc, ça, c'était parmi les freins qui étaient derrière le non-partage des ressources. Et puis, voilà un peu les chiffres. Pourquoi votre raison? Bon, on ne peut pas tout résoudre d'un coup de balai, ça serait magique, d'avoir une baguette magique qui permet de cliquer dessus et tout résoudre le problème. Et on essaie aussi de mettre en place une politique qui favorise le partage, qui permet surtout, en parlant de qualité, à tous les jeunes et à tous les maîtres qui sont qui ne sont pas vraiment dans les villes, d'avoir accès à des ressources de qualité de la même manière que tout le monde, et que surtout, eux aussi peuvent partager leurs ressources pour que d'autres personnes peuvent les voir. Je vous laisse ça, après vous pouvez les voir, mais voilà un peu, c'est pas très très glorieux en tant que partage, mais les gens commencent aussi à avoir accès à ce genre d'informations, à l'utiliser dans leurs ressources et aussi à travailler avec. L'application existe aussi sur dispositif mobile. Pourquoi dispositif mobile? Parce que dans plusieurs pays francophones du Sud ou de l'Afrique subsaharienne, ils sont mieux connectés en non-filaire sur 4G que sur le filaire. Donc, on a mis en place justement un système qui leur permet d'accéder à la plateforme en non-filaire sur dispositif mobile. Un moteur de recherche avec des ressources ne peut pas réussir si on ne peut pas l'associer avec des services. Donc, pour le faire, nous avons mis en place des services associés. Parmi les services associés, ce sont 3 MOOC. Les MOOC permettent de former sur l'ICT, sur l'utilisation de l'ICT. Donc, c'est des MOOC pour la formation des maîtres au secondaire et au primaire, le SCOL. Le SUP, c'est pour permettre la formation des enseignants supérieurs. Et un MOOC belge que nous prenons, c'est le MOOC AFA, Apprendre et à faire apprendre. C'est un MOOC de l'Université de Mons et qui permet aussi de transmettre les théories d'apprentissage. Donc, si les premiers MOOC, c'est vraiment l'utilisation des ICT ou des 10 dans l'enseignement, le MOOC Apprendre et après apprendre, c'est vous avez l'éthique et comment vous pouvez utiliser avec des méthodologies de travail ces MOOC-là. Donc, nous avons mis ces 3 MOOC, plus des formations à la production et à l'indexation des ressources, formation au déploiement du numérique, et puis des outils numériques pour la certification. Et je reprends un peu la notion de certification. Il y a plusieurs formations. Nous prenons, par exemple, à l'Agence universitaire francophone, 89 formations ouvertes à distance, ouvertes à tout le monde. Donc, tous les ans, nous ouvrons des appels pour 89 formations ouvertes et à distance. Sauf que certains pays veulent mettre en place ce genre de formation. Leur frein, c'est que qui garantit que cette formation à distance que nous allons porter est reconnue? Qui garantit que cette formation ouverte et à distance est reconnue de la même manière qu'une formation présentielle? Donc la demande était que nous mettons en place, pour rentrer un peu dans ce cadre de qualité, une certification qui garantit que cette formation-là est vraiment une formation, entre parenthèses, bonne, pour ne pas être très subjectif là-dessus. Donc voilà un peu la demande et puis les services associés qu'on a mis en place. Très rapidement, les MOOC en chiffres. Donc nous avons MOOC AFA, on n'a fait qu'une seule formation. On était à peu près 5000 inscrits et puis 537 certifiés. Bon, je sais que les chiffres, on lit un peu, mais on garde pas en tête. Donc c'est juste un peu des chiffres pour vous montrer que vraiment il y a eu un accès à ce genre d'outils et qu'il y a eu des certifiés. Et ça, c'est mon avis personnel. Même si les personnes n'arrivent pas jusqu'au bout pour être certifiées, le fait qu'ils soient inscrits, qu'ils suivent le parcours, qu'ils arrivent même pas à la fin, mais avant des étapes, c'est un gain pour nous parce qu'on a permis à des personnes d'accéder à ce genre d'informations. Dans la présentation du matin, M. Jérôme Morisset parlait de l'innovation. Et si on n'innove pas, on ne peut pas enseigner. Et effectivement, on a des apprenants qui sont plus rapides que nous. On a de l'informel qui est beaucoup plus rapide que nous. Et pour répondre à ça, nous avons essayé de mettre en place des pratiques innovantes. Les pratiques innovantes, malheureusement, le terme innovant est obsolète très vite parce que ce qui est innovant aujourd'hui ne le serait pas demain. C'est très rapidement dépassé le terme innovant, mais disons que nous avons mis en place des webinaires qui sont sur Internet, qui sont diffusés. On a une visualisation très rapide de ça. Nous avons aussi mis en place ce qu'on appelle des barcamps, qui sont des non-conférences, où on donne l'accès à tout le monde à l'information pour qu'ils parlent un peu de leur sujet, où il n'y a pas un seul conférencier, où il n'y a pas un one-man show qui détient toute l'information et que tous les autres l'écoutent. Donc c'est une sorte d'atelier participatif. Donc cet atelier participatif, un peu les chiffres, nous avons fait 11 barcamps en 2016. Quand je dis 11 barcamps, c'est vraiment dans toutes les directions de l'AEF. Donc à Yaoundé, Dakar, Ho Chi Minh Ville, Phnom Penh, toute la panoplie à droite et à gauche et puis de l'AEF. De la francophonie. Nous avons formé des personnes pour ce genre de pratiques innovantes que eux, ils reproduisent dans leurs écoles et dans leurs classes, d'une manière inattendue d'ailleurs, parce qu'ils m'envoient des photos et je suis étonnée de voir à chaque fois ces photos-là, et qu'ils le font très bien. Donc voilà un peu ce qu'on a fait. On a aussi fait une grande conférence inspirée des TED qu'on appelle TEDx, où on fait autour de la pratique pédagogique innovante. Ce genre de conférence attire beaucoup de monde et puis ça permet aux gens d'accéder à des expérimentations de l'intégration des ICT dans leur pratique. C'est que c'est bien d'être théorique, de dire voilà, on fait. Donc ce qu'on fait dans les TED, c'est on ramène des enseignants qui parlent de leur expérimentation. Et ils ne parlent pas en ramenant un robot, enfin il y a un qui ramène un drone, mais pas tous. Il y a ceux qui partent de la craie et des stylos et il dit voilà, avec un crayon et un stylo, on peut intégrer de l'ICT en demandant aux étudiants de faire ça et ça, ou aux élèves de faire ça et ça. Et donc c'est vraiment de la pratique, c'est des expériences de la vie courante qu'ils appliquent. Donc notre prochain rendez-vous pour un TEDx, c'est le 21 juillet 2017 à Marrakech. Donc s'il y a quelqu'un qui est dans les parages, il est le bienvenu. Et puis voilà, je finis sur ça. Donc merci pour votre attention.
Thanks a lot, Mona, for giving us insights in the tremendous challenge that you're leading on modernizing the tertiary education system and all the aspects that it involves, such as skills transfer, sharing of resources, and innovating in the pedagogical practices. So thanks a lot for this. We've come to the fourth presenter for this panel, fourth and final presenter. So it's my honor now to introduce Mr. David Hollow. He's the lead consultant for Jigsaw Consult, and he has completed complex evaluations and research studies in over 20 countries with a variety of donors, governments, INGOs, and community-based organizations. He's committed to helping organizations utilize the power of research and evaluation to enhance development outcomes. He provides mentoring and strategic support for a range of clients and speaks regularly at conferences in the UK and internationally and in Brussels. So please, the floor is yours. We're looking forward to hear more on the evidence behind all of this. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. As you heard, my name is David and I work for Jigsaw Consult. I have the privilege and challenge of going at the end of a very high quality set of presentations where we've heard a lot of the key themes which are pertinent to the topic today. What we're discussing today is one of the most significant conversations and challenges of our generation. How we ensure that the transformative potential of technology actually becomes of benefit to the most marginalised children in the world, and how we ensure that they benefit rather than either being exploited by technology or ignored by the potential of technology. So you're in the right place and we're having a good conversation. The organisation I work for is an independent research organisation. We're a social enterprise based in London, and like you heard, we conduct research and evaluations on the topic of education technology, trying to make sure that the transformative potential that we're all aware of is actually realised through building the evidence base of what works and why. So today I want to talk to you about the impact of digital technology on SDG 4, as the others have, and to take a slightly different angle, perhaps. There are many different things that could be spoken about when we're thinking of technology and education, and I would like to tell you a couple of stories. So the three principles to talk about today. These are three of maybe 20 or 30 principles, but if you want to get the most out of technology in education, then here are three things to do. Focus on the problems more than the solutions. Integrate from the beginning. We've heard that word quite a few times already today. And then thirdly, build on the evidence. I'll talk about each of those for a few minutes. In the education technology sector, as I'm sure you're aware, we see a lot of very enthusiastic solution-based programs. I'm used to talking to audiences where people are very optimistic about the potential of technology in education, and I get the impression that this is a slightly more diverse organisation, so you may already be on board with that. But what we suggest is if we can get away from promoting solutions and get towards a rigorous analysis of problems, then we're more likely to see the transformative potential realised. For example, without wanting to be too specific, we see lots of educational apps being developed at the moment. And I speak to app developers and they say, look at my product. My product is brilliant. My product is going to change the world. If I can just find the people who need it, then everything will be fine. And that rightly makes you laugh. It makes me laugh, but it's also very sad because it means a lot of time and money and valuable resources are being wasted because we are so obsessed with our solutions that we don't spend the time to ensure whether they're actually addressing a problem. So how do we address problems? We address problems by listening to people. As Nivi already explained so well, we address problems by spending time listening to people. So here's an example of one problem we've been working on recently. It's estimated that less than 1% of the refugees in the world get access to higher education. We don't need to talk about that in detail, but I think it's safe to assume that that is a problem. That is a real problem. And our organisation was given the privilege of spending a year trying to figure out answers to that problem. How can technology be used to enhance access and quality for refugee higher education students around the world. So the way we go about that is, first of all, we listen to a lot of people. So we went to 8 different refugee camps, and we spoke to over 300 refugee students who were using technology in order to access higher education. And we spoke to them about the challenges and the opportunities that they were facing in that. And that obviously takes a lot of time and quite a bit of money to actually be able to do that in detail. In addition to talking to the individual beneficiaries, it's also important to do a stakeholder analysis and speak to all of the organisations working in the sector. In something like refugee higher education, that's relatively straightforward because there's only about 30 or so organisations who are actively engaged in the use of technology. Spending time speaking to them, and then at the end, making sure that the answers to the problems that have been explored are presented in an accessible and applied way so that the learning can actually be used by those who need to use it. So if we want to see the transformative potential of technology, lesson 1 is focus on the problems and learn about applied solutions by listening to people deeply regarding their needs, and then doing all you can to share the findings of that. So those are 2 example reports which are available on our website and have been used in a range of different ways by all of the organisations that we talked about there in order to inform the way they're actually using technology to deliver higher education for refugees. So that's number 1. Number 2, integrate from the outset. Integration is a challenging word. It means different things to different people in all different kinds of contexts. But I think the most simple way of thinking about this would probably be that as people specialising in education technology, our aim should really be to get rid of the technology sector. So what we're trying to do is say, rather than see education technology as a permanent identity of something which is separate from education, our primary purpose is to use the benefits of technology within mainstream education. So we are all the time not trying to build a parallel track where we have education in development and we have education technology in development, and we really try not to talk to each other. But at every possible opportunity, we're seeking to integrate practice with those who've gone before us. So there are many different things that we could talk about, but 3 levels of integration within EdTech. First of all, as we've heard already, integration from the outset in relation to classroom rhythms and teacher practices. So many programs are started without paying sufficient attention to what actually takes place day by day within classrooms. What are the incentives and the challenges and the constraints that teachers face? If that isn't taken into account, then as we know, we are sure to have failure pretty quickly. Secondly, integration with regional and national education systems, and it's important to think about both of those in an interconnected but separate way. Often, education technology programs are set up in parallel to a ministry system, and the issue of integration with the Ministry of Education is only thought about once the programme grows to a certain size. So we see it time and again. You take a pilot, and a pilot, if it's lucky, may be successful and then grow and then develop and develop. And after 5 years, somebody asks the profound question of, if we really want to make this sustainable, how are we going to integrate this with the Ministry of Education? And then you realise there are so many decisions that have been taken in the foundation of the way the programme was structured that make it entirely incompatible with ministry priorities, and therefore you have to unpick a lot of what's been done in order to actually achieve your ultimate objective of scaling, of integrating and making your programme sustainable. And the third type of integration is what I alluded to at the beginning, integrating with the education sector. This may be the least self-evident of all 3. What we see a lot is educationalists who are on the whole relatively sceptical of technology, or at least ambivalent regarding the benefits, And then on the other side, we have the EdTech community, who are evangelists for technology and are often naively optimistic regarding how quickly and how big the change can be. And where it gets interesting is trying to sit in between those two communities and to try and build bridges and create dialogue and forums for interaction between traditional educationalists and EdTech enthusiasts. And if we can integrate educationalists with all of the EdTech conversations going on, again, that leads to much more chance of success. So how do we do that? An impossible question. We design based on context. Time and again, you see programs and lots of money associated with them being designed on the basis of either, most crudely, this works in a high-resource environment, so we know it will work in a low-resource environment, or, equally problematic, it's worked in one low-resource environment, and therefore we know it will work in another one. So different challenges, but both equally problematic and requiring a deep contextual understanding. Secondly, building partnerships. I think we've covered that already. And thirdly, developing plausible pathways to sustainability. If integration is a problematic word, then sustainability is also a problematic word. Everyone means different things by it, but what I mean there is that if we want to have long-term, scalable success with our EdTech programs, then we need to be thinking from the beginning about what's our strategy for the next 5 to 10 years. We have a tendency to talk about pilots wrapped up with the word innovation in a way which actually just excuses us from thinking about rigorous, informed design based on evidence. So, plausible pathways to sustainability mean that when an EdTech program starts up, if you're a donor asking questions, these are the questions you should ask, and if you're a program designer pitching for something, these are the responses you should have. There should be a clear understanding of what's the total cost of ownership around this project. Really, when we unpick the figures, how much is it going to cost and who's going to pay for it? Most importantly, how is it going to be paid for once the initial round of donor funding has gone? And let's not just accept we'll get more donor funding as a solution for sustainability. So what's the actual dynamics of how total cost of ownership and sustainability really works? And that obviously links back to effective integration within national government systems. Okay, third of all, if we are going to focus on EdTech's transformative potential, then building the evidence is of vital importance. This here is a task that we were given by DFID, the British government's International Development Department. They said to us, what we want to know is what evidence exists regarding education technology. They said, can you build us a map to identify and organise all the evidence regarding how EdTech is being used in primary and secondary levels? They asked us to do that at the end of last year, and it's finished, but it's currently with the government being reviewed. But the important thing is that this illustrates the way in which evidence is moving to the centre of the EdTech agenda. If we're to look back 10 years ago, when I was doing my PhD research on this 10 years ago, you were almost universally critiqued for suggesting that the impact of education technology was not self-evident. To suggest that actually impact might not necessarily be positive was considered anathema. So we've moved a long way from that, and that is testament to the maturing of the sector and a lot of the people involved. But still, there are some gaps around what we know and what we don't know. So DFID said to us, can you build a framework? Can you focus on low and middle income countries? Focus on everything that's happened in the last decade? And so we found them 400 studies. One of the challenges with this is that lots of people are writing about education technology, but there isn't yet much synthesis of that research. so that we can have a comprehensive understanding of what we do know and what we don't know. As I said, the research is coming out in the next couple of months, but I'll give you a couple of snapshots from it here. We mapped where most of the evidence is coming from, and we mapped the type of research that people are doing. Of those 400 or so research studies around EdTech in low-resource environments, the majority, over two-thirds, are observational studies. We have a small number of strict experimental studies, 23 in total, that's 6%. Then if we break down what types of evidence we have, quite a bit in terms of regional focus of the evidence is coming from East Africa, primarily Kenya and Tanzania is where most research is taking place. Most of the research being done is on educational software or the use of tablets. And then, as you can see, everything in terms of the experimental studies is focused on curriculum and pedagogy. So it starts to build up a picture of the kind of things that we know as a sector and the kind of things that we don't know. We know where the research is coming from and we know the topics that are being focused on. What we don't know yet is having a consistent way to assess the quality of evidence and build that together as a learning community. And there are obviously significant barriers to achieving that. So, to close, some principles for how we might build on the evidence effectively. Firstly, undertaking synthesis and targeted research. If you're interested in contributing to the EdTech dialogue and how we as a global community move forward with this so that EdTech can actually improve educational outcomes, then one of the top priorities is synthesis and targeted research. What I mean by that is research which can draw together everything that is currently known, and then research which plugs the gaps of what we really don't know at the moment. The second thing that we really need is a framework for understanding what we consider to be good quality evidence. Evidence is a word that is subjective, and everyone likes to think that their evidence is strong. So we need independently verifiable standards for how we actually talk about this. Would you like me to turn this off? No, go ahead. Okay.
Is it something you do? No, go ahead.
All right. So, evidence standards. Okay, can everyone hear now? All right. As I said, that was the point. There is that there is a lot of there's a lack of transparency around what we mean by certain words when we're talking about learning outcomes and randomised controlled trials, and we will benefit as a community from developing an agreed framework for that. Thirdly, this is a separate presentation. We need to embrace the way education technology is changing monitoring and evaluation. Monitoring and evaluation is quite a traditional area of work. And education technology opens up a huge array of possibilities in terms of how we actually track the learning that's taking place. The old logic of baseline, midline, and endline, and try and keep everything consistent in your program from the beginning to the end doesn't really work in a world of real-time data, individualized learning pathways, where you're using algorithms to actually change the way the program works so that it improves. So that's going to be something that will be big in the next few years, is seeing if monitoring and evaluation systems can actually adapt to the reality of education technology programs. Fourthly, designing programs that can actually be measured. Most programs think about measurement at the middle and at the end of their life cycle. Whether or not a program can be measured effectively is determined in its design phase. What we see a lot is programs which incorporate too many variables on too small a scale to actually be able to know whether or not there's been any positive impact. So we need to think about whether or not our intervention can actually be measured in the way it's designed. Number 5, understand what we're trying to measure in terms of outcomes. A lot of programs are required by donors to have particular outcome indicators. That is right and fair, but we need to understand whether what we are trying to do with our EdTech intervention actually links to the outcome indicators that have been given to us that we need to achieve. If you don't do that, you find at the end of a program that there is a significant amount of effort required to try and somehow squeeze what's actually happened into the outcome indicators that you have been given. That's a well-known process, but if we are wanting to see transformative potential realised, then we need to think, are the outcomes that we're being asked to measure actually the things we're going to have an impact on? Often donors require numeracy and literacy indicators, where sometimes a program may be more well-suited to instigating a change in worldview or future aspirations. They're things that are harder to measure, but may ultimately be more appropriate. And then the final point, we need to build and foster a culture of sharing around evidence building. This is difficult because education technology involves both public and private sectors, and there are lots of disincentives for people sharing. When someone gets knowledge about what works, inevitably there are reasons to keep that to oneself. But if we want to actually see change take place, then we need to figure out a way, whilst recognising incentives will always be there, to actually share knowledge around what works, why, and how it can be developed for the future. So if we manage to achieve those 3 things, then I think we will have come a long way as a community in terms of realising the transformative potential of technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for emphasizing these 3 very important principles. I would like to invite the members of the panel to come up front now, because I'm sure your presentations will have provoked several questions. So as I told you, it's your conference. Let us know what questions you'd like to ask. You can ask them in English, French, or Dutch, as you wish. I simply request you to first introduce yourselves and perhaps start with asking a single question and not 3 or 4 at the same time. So who's ready with a question for our panelists? Please. There's a microphone that will go around. Yeah, behind the pillar there.
Hello, I'm Tom from VVOB. I have a question for Nivi. It seems you spent quite a lot of time on developing your solution. You spent time in classrooms, spent time with teachers, and it seems to work. But my question is related to the cost. What is the cost per learner, per student, or per user, and who's to pay for that cost?
Okay, thank you. It's indeed very good that you address your question, if you can, to a specific panelist. That will make it easier to deal with them. We'll take a range of questions. So the next one, yes?
Ma question s'adresse à Madame Mona. L'éducation à distance, la formation à distance.
Et si vous pouvez vous présenter aussi, s'il vous plaît.
Oh, ok.
It's okay. The mic is okay.
Ah, ok. Nelson Villarier, originaire du Burundi. J'habite au Grand-Duché de Luxembourg. J'ai initié la création d'une association, Éducation universelle en Afrique. Donc, on promouvoit l'éducation pour tous, surtout en milieu de la diaspora africaine. inciter à faire quelque chose dans le domaine de l'éducation dans leur village. Et donc, dans mon village, on a construit une école secondaire et le gouvernement vient de la reconnaître comme une école d'informatique, une école technique d'informatique. Et notre problème, c'est justement d'introduire tout ça dans cette école. Il n'y a pas d'enseignants, etc. Et donc, je suis intéressé par l'éducation à distance, de savoir si nous pourrions, nous sommes en train de planifier un projet, si ça serait utopique de penser former des enseignants donc du secondaire à distance dans ces matières-ci. Mais par ricochet, je voudrais savoir, vous êtes à la francophonie, pourquoi vous visez seulement les universitaires? Qu'est-ce qu'on fait des enseignants de l'école secondaire?
Okay, merci beaucoup. Thank you. Any other question? Yes, at the very back.
I'm Peter Hoetels. I'm having a question for David for the last presentation. Actually linked to the first question, I have the question on how do you measure the impact in a society? So you have to pay for tools to develop them. On the other hand, you were talking about how do you have an educational impact was my impression on how the skills are developed, but how do you transfer it really to what you see transform the society, and can you also have an evaluation of that? I think it's a very difficult question.
Thank you. I see there's another question there, please.
En fait, j'ai une question générique. Est-ce que vous avez encore de l'espoir pour les technologies de l'information et de la communication comme outil de développement lorsque l'on parle de technologies en termes d'accès, de connectivité, d'hardware, de software, alors que nous sommes dans l'Internet des objets? Pour ça, il faut lire Jérémy Rifkin. Même lorsque l'évaluation est correcte, et ça c'est le cas de Madame Sharma, ce qui est développé, c'est un kit, je cite, Only Education Content, qui est en contradiction avec la troisième conférence, qui utilise le cadre du knowledge management, qui a été théorisé par Monaka Takuchi, et qui notamment parle de l'informal level. Vous vous souvenez de la grille qui nous a été présentée, donc c'est assez en contradiction avec ce qui a été produit par le deuxième projet. Et enfin, concernant la question de la culture d'Internet, qui est une culture du partage, lorsqu'un portail n'est pas partagé, il y a des raisons. Et en fait, est-ce que les raisons ne seraient pas justement que c'est un contenu fermé, hiérarchique et donc contraire évidemment aux technologies? Voilà.
Okay, merci beaucoup. I see there's one more question here in the middle.
Oui, Lise Kandava du Burundi. Je pose une question à M. Richardson. Dans votre développement, vous avez parlé des clés de la réussite du TCI en parlant qu'il faut intégrer les politiques, et puis après les communautés, et puis après l'école. Je voudrais poser une question par rapport au système où les politiques, justement, n'ont pas des priorités à développer des TCI pour des raisons économiques ou de moyens, parce qu'ils ont d'autres priorités plus importantes, la santé ou autres, surtout pour les pays qui sont en voie de développement. Est-ce que vous ne pensez pas que ce serait aussi intéressant de commencer par l'école, des petits projets à échelle pilote, mais qui pourraient éveiller justement la conscience des politiques quand ils se rendent compte qu'il y a des résultats et qui pourraient après les intégrer dans leur politique. Donc c'est plutôt prendre aussi à l'inverse. Est-ce que ça pourrait pas avoir des résultats? Parce que si on doit attendre toujours des politiques qui intègrent tout, des fois ça prend du temps, surtout pour certains dirigeants qui ont d'autres priorités que l'éducation, et surtout aussi les TCI parce qu'ils n'en connaissent peut-être pas et qui n'ont pas eu l'occasion de les avoir dans leur enseignement. Voilà.
Merci beaucoup. Est-ce qu'on y ajoute encore une question? Is there one question for this round? Yes, please. And then I'll give you the floor back to the panelists, please.
Sabine Mulder from the City of Antwerp Development Corporation. Just a small question for Nivi. If you train teachers to maintain the computers and things like that, I heard a lot of people they leave and go to bigger cities because they're very wanted. So how do you cope with that problem?
Okay, thank you. We'll now give the presenters a moment to briefly address these questions. I hope we can do a second round of questions after that. So if you haven't been able to ask a question, keep on thinking about it and how to formulate it. Each of you has at least one question directly addressed to you, and there were some general questions, so please respond to that specific question and the overall comments if you like. We'll start with Nivi. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. I think that's something I forgot to mention, is the cost of the intervention. So right now we're able to afford to retail the KO kit at just a second. Okay, now. Okay. And can you hear me? No? How about now? The cost of the entire hardware, the KO kit with 40 tablets, the micro server, the super brick, and the content inside it is $6,000 per unit. So, you know, it works out to $125 per device. But obviously that includes the storage and the charging capacity as well. Who's paying for it? That's an interesting question. So this was, you know, really, it would have been good to have spoken to David before and say, like, you know, how would we integrate this? We very much thought the uptake would be by governments, and that's starting to happen now, but initially it was schools, private schools by themselves, then donors, organizations like Close the Gap, who are here today. So they approach and work with schools to give them ICT interventions and want to obviously give them appropriate interventions. Also, some schools aren't able to afford it. $6,000 is a lot. So we work with financial organizations to provide microfinance payment options for schools. Thank you for that question, because it is something I didn't get a chance to address. Can I do it over? Yeah. And then I noticed also in your question you said it's a solution that seems to work, and the gentleman in the back also said, you know, how do we measure the impact? So, you know, the part of my presentation that I didn't have time to go over and include in 15 minutes is, when we talk about metis, that's good, about local knowledge, but metrics, actually measuring impact. One, it's a very difficult thing to do. Two, it's a very expensive thing to do. And then if you're a private for-profit organization, it's often very hard to justify doing that. And I think that's a real shame, because some of the impacts that we're seeing and we're hoping to measure are, one, an improvement in test scores, so whether that's literacy, numeracy, higher grade test scores. The second is social and behavioral